Okay, welcome everyone. I apologize, we were a little bit longer in closed session, so thank you for hanging in there with us. So now we're going to have our joint study session and review the proposed 2017-2018 annual operating budget. City Clerk, do we have a confirmation of a quorum?
Mayor Gilmore confirming a quorum.
Thank you. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the public. Today we are going to talk about the operating budget. Last week we did a study session on capital budget, and today we are doing the operating budget. I'll start with the good news that the upcoming budget for 27-18 it'll be presented as we are supposed to, as a balanced budget. However, what we want to do today is just show you some details of the numbers and the trends that are coming our way. You may have read in the papers, and other cities are going through the same thing. PERS costs will rise because CalPERS has revised their return on investments downwards from 7.5% to 7% over the next 3 years. That has big implications, not only on us, but several cities. And there are several articles in Mercury News and through professional journals and everything that League of California Cities, for example, puts out. Several cities are really nervous about that whole thing. So those are the kinds of things we will talk about today. Like I said, we'll be presenting a balanced budget, which hopefully you will approve on June 13th for next year. However, we have to start thinking in terms of other revenue sources and how do we manage going forward. Because in the 5-year plan, when it's presented to you, you'll see in the out years, it's not really balanced as we project at this point, which points to the fact that we will have to look for other revenue sources. We have to look at how we staff everything and just the community and council expectations, because if it relates to staffing, additional staffing, which council has been very nice and supportive in approving positions last year, and we'll talk about for the upcoming year also. But every position then equates to additional dollars as far as pension costs are concerned, et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, I just want to point out that last year, at the end of the year, we had additional revenues, and which played into this current fiscal year that we are in. It was to the tune of about $12 million. That at the end of the year, our revenues were higher than projected. And we were fortunate that way. And if you recall, we started a trust fund and we put $5 million towards that. Other monies went towards infrastructure improvements for pavement and other things. So we were fortunate. And so this year, again, we are hoping that when we get the actual revenue numbers, that they're higher and we have to make some decisions like that. However, in the proposed budget at this point, I would like to point out that that trust fund, we are not, given the numbers at this point, we cannot show any money going into that trust fund. So we are hoping for the year-end revenues to be higher again so we can continue to do that. Similarly, again, your priorities that we discussed at the offsite, infrastructure improvements and other things that we need in the city, in the capital project reserve, there won't be any money shown at this point. Okay, so those are the challenges, and that's where, as Councilmember O'Neill has pointed out in the past also, that we have to look at additional revenue sources. And I'm not saying at this point that it's a sort of an infrastructure tax, community-wide, or whatever it is. We'll cross that bridge later. But today, we just want to have a discussion, and I would expect council to ask good questions. You always do, but in other words, real detailed questions and maybe even guidance, looking at certain things and how to provide community with all the services that we do. But at the same time, on the other side, how do we balance the needs from staffing perspective, et cetera? Okay, so with that overview, I'll quickly walk through some slides myself, and then after me, Angie Kretsch, the acting director of finance, will come in to walk us through some detailed numbers like we did last time. In addition, today we also have Mr. Bartel from Bartel Associates, who's going to give a presentation on these CalPERS issues and how other cities and we are facing all these things. And as part of the questions and answers, I just want to let you know that we've also done benchmarking with other cities in our areas, and Angie can also share with you what they've done and what kind of things they're facing. And I can tell you in generality that a lot of other cities are not adding any more positions, and some of the cities are presenting negative budgets, which theoretically you're not supposed to. You're supposed to present balanced budgets, but with the projections, some of the cities are already projecting negative budgets. So with that, next slide, please. All right, so this is the agenda for today, and hopefully we can finish in an hour 15 minutes before the regular session at 7. So budget process, the budget, operating budget, and general, and then we go into the details of various funding sources, which is the general fund, enterprise fund, and all the other funds. And then we want to provide to you a 5-year outlook at the end. Next slide. So as part of the budget process, you approved budget principles, and we also discussed that at the council strategic planning session that we had in January at the convention center. So these are all captured here. I won't go into each and every, and they are in your handouts. Next slide. So this point to be noted is that we went to the Citizens Advisory Committee in February, and also we had the budget original study session in February, and where we obtained the council and public input. In addition, I don't know if it's listed elsewhere or not, there was a Citizens Advisory Committee on Monday as well, and well attended, and it went for a couple hours. So as council directed, we went back and we got their input as well. Next slide. So in addition to the council budget principles, then I also issue some guidelines just to guide all the departments for consistency. And so obviously we have to contractually, or we have to include the contractually agreed upon wage and benefit increases, because we go through various negotiations with bargaining units. The staffing needs, I would like to point out, and you'll see it in the charts following this. As you know, the public safety departments, police and fire, they've done their internal department staffing studies, and whatever those recommendations were, we are making those whole in the coming year. Fire, I believe, is already there. Police was going to do a 2-phase approach, and even though the budget numbers are tight, but that's a commitment, and we are including those positions in the budget. So, and also looking at revenue growth and other sources of revenue. We may be leaving, let's say some grants on the table. A lot of people have asked that. But that's a tough challenge. I mean, in order to capture everything, on one hand, you may need an additional position who's looking at these grants out there, and then the position may pay for itself. But we haven't really added that position. I just wanted to share with you, but we can see how you feel about it, and going forward, we can look into that. Next slide. Okay, so next, please. So these are the overall numbers. The proposed annual operating budget citywide is almost 740 million. Which is pretty good budget, good size. And that's down below is the breakdown by different funds: general fund, special revenues, internal revenue, and enterprise. So overall, it adds up to 740 million. The first two columns compare the last year or the year we are in to the proposed year, starting in July. And then you can see it's a increase overall in different funds. Next slide. And so these are the positions. I just wanted to put this table up there. If you recall, last year we did some cleanup because there were a lot of positions which are frozen, unfunded. We cleaned all that up, but overall, council authorized about 68 or so positions last year. So last year we were at 1,078 FTE, full-time equivalent. That's what FTE stands for. And so in the proposed budget, we really had to look at it very carefully with fine-tooth comb, not because, it's Christmas in June or July or whatever, but really, do we really need the positions? And also, I would like to point out, I really challenged our staff or department heads to look into if positions were approved previously, and those are vacant positions now. They have not been filled for one reason or the other. Let's revisit. Do we really need those positions filled at the level they were approved? Or going forward, do we need to reclassify them and need has changed? So all that is in this mix. So with that, next year, it's an addition of about 27 positions. And we can give you further details, and you can ask questions, and we can talk about specific positions also. Part of that group of positions, and maybe next slide does show that, if you go to the next one. So this is, we wanted to just show you a department-wide breakdown. And just to emphasize, I think next slide will show the circles. So just wanted to point out, community development, for example, they have a funding source because, they get fees for their reviews and everything. So these are not general fund impact positions. They get revenue from the fees. So that's why they're included in this proposal. Similarly, if you see under police down below, next slide. So those are the other 8 positions. As I mentioned, they are based on the staffing studies that the 2 departments did previously. And so this is the second year, and we are making them whole based on the staffing study. Now, one thing to point out, in addition, while you add these positions, there's ongoing attrition. People are retiring, people are promoting. So it's not that human resource department has just that workload. Their workload is high because of the turnover of the positions as well. Okay? Next slide. So, and then these are the enterprise. Previous slide showed 21 positions, and these show 5.4, so total is about 27. Next slide. So at this point, I would like to ask Angie to come up and walk us through the different funding sources and the impacts of those funding sources.
Good evening. Before I get started, I do want to recognize my staff. They're here. Marcelo Pena is here. He is our budget manager. Some of you probably have met him. And Felisa Lee is also here. We also have Alita Riniker. She's not here this time, but I just want to say they worked very, very hard and do a great job to put both of these documents together. We have Randy and Robert, you met with the CIP, and so they're a great team, and I'm very lucky to actually be working with them.
So are we, thank you.
Thank you, and I was supposed to do that. She even gave me names.
Had to do it for you, Reggie.
So starting with the general fund, we are budgeting almost $219 million in revenues. And as you can see, I put the little box there because Councilman Davis said that she liked the boxes. So, it's of the general fund revenue, $131 million are those 3: transit occupancy tax, sales tax, and property tax. They make up 59% of the general fund's revenues. So those are big, if something happens in those revenue sources, that's where you'll see a big change. On the appropriations, I wanted to show you by type. And so you can see our biggest is obviously the increase is 10.3 in salaries and benefits, and that makes up 78% of the general fund budget. So that's huge, and you'll see when I show you the enterprise funds that theirs are much less in salary and benefits. On the, this is by department, so I wanted to show you where the increases are. So the biggest increase is in police at $8.2 million, and that is due to the staffing study that we spoke about. They're fully staffed now, and also some negotiated MOU. And then we also have the community development department, and as the city manager had mentioned, these positions are offset by building reserves, so they are paid for, or at least half of that is paid for through another revenue source. Also, as the city manager mentioned, we were not able to put any money into the capital reserve. We were able to fund the 25% of the working capital reserve, and that's 25%, that's 3 months of, if something were to happen, that would get the city through 3 months of operations. So it's not a huge, it looks big, but overall, it's not a big number.
And then may I add something here, if you don't mind? So that's something we need to consider going forward in the next few years, it's always 25% of the budget. As the budget increases, the 25% keeps increasing, but still we are at like about 50 million or so in the working capital. So someday we may have to consider a dollar amount that not necessarily 25%, but what we can live with, although we are required to, have 3 months worth of reserves. So just pointing that out.
Yeah, one of the things that, going forward, I may ask you to consider is going down to a 20% in the short term so that we can put the additional 5% into the pension trust. But that's something we can all have meetings about and talk about and get your input on that. On the enterprise funds, you can see the largest increases in the electric fund, the $49.6 million. And the enterprise funds make up $496 million of the total budget. So in looking at the electric utility, you can see that the biggest portion of this is charges for services. And I know it looks kind of weird because I'm saying 104%, but the way we currently do our budgeting, we put our transfers out in the revenues and net them. It's something that probably next year I would like to change, but I just wanted to show you because it matches the document. So you can see there's a negative over here of the net transfers and other revenues, and that's what that is for. We wanted to show you of those charges for services what the breakdown of those revenues are. So you can see the biggest portion are the industrial customer charges at 85% of that $421 million. And then residential only makes up about 6% of that. And so here's where I wanted to kind of show you where I showed you in the general fund that the salary and benefits made up 78%. With the electric, it makes up 10%. Their biggest expense is in resource and production, which is the purchase of power. So that is actually going up, and that's really not in our control. That's what we're charged. Moving on to water and sewer, I did this similar to what we did with electric. So you can see, again, their biggest is the charges for services. Water and sewer are at $68.6 million, with charges for services being $86.7 million. And I know, again, that kind of looks weird, but because of the transfers. And again, here is another example of salary and benefits not being their highest, but yet their resource and production with the purchase of water being their largest expense. On internal service funds, they stayed relatively flat. You can see the increases aren't that big. They make up $15.8 million of the overall budget. And same with special revenue. It's relatively flat, but the main difference is the last one, the housing and urban development, our HUD. We moved that from the CIP into the operating. So it looks like an increase, but it has always been budgeted. It was just in the other budget. And then we have the agency and authority funds. So this is the convention center. And you can see the increase is small, 0.5, and then the Conventions Visitors Bureau is the portion that the city pays. That if you look in the budget document, you'll probably see a higher ending number, but this is what the city contract pays, is the 1.5. So here's the fun part, the 5-year outlook. So on the revenues, you can see that we are showing that they're going to increase. I mean, revenues are still strong. We're not taking into account any type of recession. So we looked out to 22, 23. And it comes out to what we were using is probably about a 3 or 4% increase each year. And that's pretty, I mean, you can look and you can start with 2011 and 2011, 12, and 12, 13, you can see it's only $1 million more there. There's some spikes, and I'm assuming, I wasn't here, but I'm assuming that some of these are one-time revenues that maybe made it spike. Expenditures, you can see that now those are increasing by quite a bit. Let me just, if you focus on the 22-23 year, you can see $294.5 million, and this is all general fund. So, and then if I go back to the revenues, you can see we're only saying we're going to get 256.4, or I think 0.6. So here is the slide on the PERS expenditures, and it shows you how much. So if we go to 17-18, we're showing that we're going to be at $41.2 million. And by 22-23, it's going to grow to $73.2 million. And this is the rates and what we used, and again, you're going to have a presentation by John Bartel from Bartel and Associates, and we used his numbers in the 18-19 through 22-23 years. 17-18, we had already incorporated what PERS had given us. So, and it has been the case where those numbers are usually higher when it comes out. So you'll see that Mr. Bartel's numbers are higher for 17-18, and we did not use those numbers because we just received those. So here's the slide that I know most of you are familiar with from last year, and I think I presented it to you when I first started the budget process. 17-18, we are not showing any surplus. The only amount we had was the 4.9 that we are actually putting in the working capital. Going out, because of these huge increases, next year we have an $8.5 million deficit going out to 37.9. And again, it's going to have to be us all coming together, as the city manager said, and kind of trying to come up with some ideas to actually address this. And we'll have to do it sooner than waiting until January of next year when we're working on the budget, because we'll need some ideas to actually be able to incorporate into that 18-19. So I'm available for any questions. If not, I can turn it over to Mr. Bartel and have him do his presentation. I'll leave it up to whatever you guys would like.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Why don't we go ahead and...
Yeah, let's hear the whole thing and then we'll ask the questions. Thank you very much for that presentation.
So I didn't include the PowerPoint because it's included in your agenda packet. So you can go along on that.
Oh, okay, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. One of the things I try to say every time I talk to a council, sometimes it sounds a little trite. I promise you I don't mean it as such. It is absolutely a great honor to be speaking to you all. Fact of the matter is I could probably talk on this topic till you all are blue in the face. So I'm at the insistence of staff, I'm not going to do that. So what I do want you to do is, so you all ought to have the full discussion outline in your agenda packet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through several of the specific slides. I'm going to define some terminology when we get to those slides. I will, however, start off with something that I will do my best to try to reinforce before. If we were having this conversation a couple of years ago, one of the things you would hear me say is that the contribution CalPERS is going to charge you is not sufficient to pay off the unfunded liability. So you ought to think very hard about the order of magnitude of the unfunded liability. So I want you to know that I've changed my tune dramatically on that. CalPERS contribution policy changes, the discount rate changes, the assumption changes, everything that they have done will, in the long run, pay your unfunded liability off. So while people want to focus on the order of magnitude of the unfunded liability, I actually think what is more important is looking at where your contribution rates are going to go and try to figure out what that will do to your budget. And because if you can figure out a way to make those contributions one way or another, then the unfunded liability will take care of itself. So I want you to just kind of keep that, if you will, in the back of your mind when we go through this information. This is a little different than the way people think. People look at the unfunded liability and go, oh my goodness, this is a great big number. The contributions are also going to be a great big number, but they will in fact be paying the unfunded liability off. So let's talk just very, very briefly about the four things that got us to where we are. So thing number one is over the last 15 plus years, CalPERS investment return has been below the expected return. So that generates investment losses. Really important to understand there are only two ways to get money into the trust to pay for benefits. And those two ways are contributions and investment return. If investment return is not sufficient, then contributions have to be higher. So it's a zero-sum game, if you will. So the investment losses generate higher contributions. Thing number two, sometimes people think this is the single biggest driver. It is not. But around the state agencies negotiated enhanced benefits. You all did the same thing for both your safety and your non-safety groups. So that those enhanced benefits, almost without exception, were negotiated at a time when we all thought life was going to be good forever. And in fact, CalPERS kind of used that terminology, and lo and behold, that was wrong. So the enhanced benefits, providing prior service to all active employees, for many of them shortly before they retire, have really exacerbated the problem. And the third one is, kind of hinted at this a minute ago, contribution policy. So the contribution policy at CalPERS focused on smoothing contribution rates, not giving you big increases from one year to the next. And what that meant was paying the unfunded liability kind of took a back seat. Now their new contribution policy does the exact opposite. It is a focus on paying the unfunded liability, and if that means in some years your contributions are going to be a little bit more volatile, maybe up, maybe down, probably more up than down, that was a big impact. And the fourth thing is demographics. We're going to look at this in a couple of slides, but demographics means you are a city that has been around a long time. You have a fair number of folks who have retired, who are receiving benefits. When we look at the liability for retirees, when we look at the number of retirees compared to active employees, it is a high number. That is really just where you are, if you will. And those demographics drive CalPERS contribution policy and will drive where your contribution rates are going to go. So CalPERS made three significant changes. Change number one is the change that I mentioned, the contribution policy. What they're doing is putting a focus on paying the unfunded liability off. Change number two is they really go through every 4 years a study to make sure their assumptions are good. The single biggest change in the most recent experience study was recognition that mortality, how long people will live, will continue to improve. So you can think of it as longevity. How long will people live? We continue to live longer. CalPERS now is anticipating that we will continue to live longer into the future. By and large, something has happened that's happened ever since we've gotten indoor plumbing, if you will. So what's going on here is they have built that into the numbers. Let me make one very quick statement. All of these changes are changes that CalPERS arguably should have made several years ago. But what's really going on with these changes is they're sort of being layered one on top of the other, which is going to drive your contribution rate up noticeably. So if we go back to the very first one, contribution policy changes, that was first impacted your 15-16 rates, but because it's being phased in, you don't see the full impact till 1920. The assumption changes, the mortality change, first impacting 16-17 rates. You don't see the full impact till 2021. And then the discount rate that has been alluded to a couple of times, CalPERS is using a phase-in of a phase-in, if you will. So what they're doing is they're dropping from a 7.5 down to 7, but they're doing that over the next 3 valuations. So they dropped to 7 3/8 in the June 30, 16 valuation, first impacting your 18-19, full impact 22-23, and they don't get to a 7% discount rate until the June 30, 18 valuation, full impact in 24-25. So when you look at where your rates are going to go, when we look at the projection of the rates, you're not going to see your rates cap out for several years. It's going to be a relatively steep climb over that period of time. The other comment that I will make is CalPERS is going through that drop to the 7% discount rate was really implemented because CalPERS outside investment advisors, their chief investment officer, the actuarial staff, and the CFO, chief financial officer, sort of marched arm in arm to the CalPERS board and said, this is going to happen. We haven't finished our study yet, but you should be aware this is going to happen. And then the CalPERS decided to lower the discount rate. The study that CalPERS is working on will either confirm or not whether the 7% discount rate is the right discount rate. My educated guess is it will either confirm 7 or 6 3/4. Just so you know, not everybody agrees with me on that. Some people think it might be higher. I don't. But that's what's going on this summer at CalPERS. And then the very last thing, so this will feel like piling on, but I think this last bullet is the most essential thing they are doing. What they are doing is making the investment mix more conservative over time. Let me kind of give you a very simple fact. In the 15-16 fiscal year, total contributions to CalPERS were about $14 billion. Benefit payments, about $20 billion. So benefit payments substantially higher than contributions, and investment return in that particular year, not very good. What did that mean? That meant that they actually had a deficit. They did not have enough cash. They don't have a cash account. They did not have enough cash. They had to sell investments just to make benefit payments. That is a function of the system is mature like the city, if you will. So if they don't deal with that, if they have too many years where the investment return is crummy, then the system could in fact be in jeopardy. So this risk mitigation strategy is designed to significantly mitigate this. Again, let me say this again. I think this is the single most important thing that they have done and will do. So what this is this is a policy that will bring that, we think, that 7% discount rate down to 6, but it will do so over a very long period of time. In years when they have a good investment return, they will take some of those gains off the table and use that to sort of make the investments more conservative. So I'm going to go through the next couple of slides relatively quickly. Slide 10 is how we think that discount rate will happen. I'd like you to take a look at slide 12. There's 2 key bars on slide 12. There's the dark red bar. Those are your active employees. You can see relatively stable over the last 20 years or so. And then you see a solid blue bar. Those are the number of folks receiving benefit payments. So what you see is ever since, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2007, you've had more people receiving benefits than you have active employees. And where you really see this is on slide 13. So these numbers represent the actuarial accrued liability. That's the value of benefits due to service that's already been rendered. Actuaries think of that as a target asset value. Your total actuarial accrued liability for non-safety, this does not include safety, $627 million. You had a market value of assets of about $405 million, an unfunded liability of $221 million. But then take a look at the components of that $627 million number. 218 of that is for active employees. Almost double that number, not quite, almost double that number is the liability for people who have already retired. So you've got an active liability of $218 million, a retiree liability of $388 million. So I don't, I'm going to get my, the risk of getting myself in serious trouble here. If what you did was you said, well, let's stop having active employees accrue benefits, let's take care of our unfunded liability, what happens is you still have to pay off that unfunded liability, the $222 million. That does not go away. And remember, a large portion of that belongs to people who are not working at the city anymore. And then those previous slides, I went through them very quickly. I'd be happy to go through them in detail, but those are the assumptions we're using to project the contribution rates. So slide 21 has your miscellaneous contribution rate. These are as a percentage of pensionable wages going from 32.3% in your current fiscal year to about 50% in 25-26. And then it will actually come down. It's going to come down because your rates are a function of various components, amortization bases. You will be paying one of those off. That will drop your contribution rate. But I'd also like you to look at those percentages above and below the green line. The green line sort of represents what we think of as sort of a 50% confidence level number. What does that mean? When we're doing our projections, we do a complicated analysis that shows investment return ranging, and half of our projections are above the green line. Half of them are below the green line. And when you look at those hollow squares, 25% of our projections are above those hollow squares. And 25% are below the solid green squares. So what happens is you can kind of get an idea that there is a fair amount of volatility in where we're projecting your contribution rates to go. So believe it or not, slide 22 is my good news slide. The reason it's a good news slide is not because it's easy to read. I've worn glasses since before I was in kindergarten. I don't think I can read any of those numbers. What I can tell you, though, is look at the nature of the picture of those lines. Both the solid squares, the hollow squares, and that green line, and what you really see is contribution rates go up noticeably, and generally they come down. It takes them a long time for them to come down, but they come down. So I think of the good news is my grandkids will not be paying that high of a contribution rate. It will be crazy painful over the next 15, 20 years. But the rates are designed to get that unfunded liability paid off so you get to a reasonable contribution, albeit in a long time. So the next couple of slides, slide 23 and 24, split your contribution into two components. These are the same green lines that we saw on the previous slides, but what you really see is a light orange line. That is the normal cost rate, the value of benefits being earned by active employees, again expressed as a percentage of pay. And the red line is the payment on the unfunded liability. What you really see here is the reason your rate is going up payment on the unfunded liability. So for me, as a lifetime California resident, that is exactly what I want to see. It's not that I want to see it go up. I want to see it at a level that will take care of your unfunded liability. And that is exactly what is going on here. And then slide 24 is probably the single most depressing slide here, with the exception of a cousin slide for safety. These show your contributions as dollar amounts expressed as thousands. So in your 16-17 year, that's about $19.6 million. And when you look at 25-26, you're at a little short of $41 million. So the dollar amount that you need to find will more than double over that 9-year period. And then I'm going to go through the next couple of slides relatively quickly. This is safety, so slide 28. Very similar to your miscellaneous slide, the solid red, the dark red bars, active employees, the dark blue bars, retirees. You can see really the steady increase in the number of retirees. Very, very similar numbers for safety. Total liability, $657 million, 458 in assets unfunded of about $199 million. But of that 657, 176 of it is for active employees, and 478 of it is for people who have already retired. So this is absolutely indicative of an agency that's been around for a long time. You've had people earning benefits, you've had people retire, and that 478 compared to the 176 is a high percentage of your liability that belongs to people who have already retired. Projection of the safety contribution rates in 16-17, 43.3. We're projecting that to grow to about 74% of pay. And again, similar slide. I can't really read the numbers there, but you can look and see we are projecting the city's rate to eventually have the unfunded liability by and large be paid off. And you all have a cost-sharing arrangement with your classic employees. And so you have, we have a third line on both 43 and 44, and that represents the portion of the reduction in the city contribution because of cost sharing. And then when you look at slide 44, 16-17 contribution, $17.9 million. Projected to be about $42.5 million when we go out to 27, 28. So for me, I think of this as what options do you have? And the options I think are the things to think about are, where do you get the money from? And then question number 2 is, what do you do with it once you get it? I think there are limited, unfortunately, great ideas as to what you can do to stem this tide. Just so you know, just because there's an item up here does not mean I am a fan of it. The very first one is pension obligation bonds. GFOA. GFOA has a little white paper. I want to say it's 2 paragraphs. By and large, it says don't do it. And so you would not hear me say that. What you would hear me say is that if you decide to go down that path, spend the time and make sure you are incredibly educated before you do it, because it can sound good depending upon who's making the presentation, and it may not be as good as it sounds. Second one is borrow from general fund reserves, move that money either into a supplemental pension trust or into an internal service fund to only be used to pay the CalPERS rate. Third one is one-time payments. You get to the end of the year, you have a budget surplus, you take a portion of that budget surplus and you give it to CalPERS or you move it into the supplemental trust. And so the first one is, where do you get the money from? And the second one is, what do you do with it once you have it? And so really, option number one is you give the money directly to CalPERS. There are lots of advantages of that. The single biggest disadvantage is you may not get the credit in the year that you need the credit. And so for me, if you look at where your contribution rates are going to go and you believe they're not going to be a problem, I think giving it to CalPERS is by far the best choice. If when you look at where your contribution rates are going to go and they are a problem, then I think you may want to set money aside and use it in those years rather than giving it directly to CalPERS. Second option is internal service fund. You move money into a fund. The advantage to that is the council has complete discretion over how you use that. With all due respect, the disadvantage to that is the council has complete discretion over how you use that.
What are you trying to say?
Yeah, I'm trying to not be quite as straight as maybe I should. The second disadvantage is you are restricted in terms of how that money can be invested. So the expectation on the rate of return, you probably are earning somewhere in the neighborhood of 75, 100 basis points on city investments now. And so that is substantially below what you could earn if you move it into a supplemental trust or if you give it to CalPERS. The advantage, though, is you really don't, your money is invested on a preservation of capital basis. When you give it to CalPERS, when you move it into a supplemental trust, it is certainly possible you might lose some principal depending upon when you invest that money. So the third one is irrevocable supplemental trust. For our clients that look out into the future and are having some difficulty figuring out where they're going to get the revenue to come from to go ahead and make those payments, I think setting money aside now to go ahead and help with those payments in the future may be as good a solution as you possibly can get. Not right for everybody, but it certainly could be right for some folks. Fact of the matter is I can keep talking. I've gotten to the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember O'Neill.
Sadly, one of my favorite topics. Thank you for the very interesting presentation, and thank you, Rajiv and Angie, for bringing all this information to us this evening. I think it's very enlightening for the council and for the members of the public. So having been someone who survived several waves of tech booms and busts, and having lived through people trying to tell me, oh, we have a new economic paradigm. Don't worry about all those things you're talking about. Don't worry about it. And I was like, yeah, right. The emperor has no clothes. Emperor has no clothes. So, I find it interesting in one of your charts. It's very, I think, very telling that, where those numbers cross, where those bars cross, where all of a sudden we had a huge flood was 2007 of retirees, which I think is when the decision was made to go from 2.0 to 2.7 as for annual multiplier for pensions. In your estimation, if the system had stayed at 2.0, which is now what the PEPRA employees have, would we be in this situation?
Whoops.
Recognizing the baby boomer demographics we have. And
So let me go back to miscellaneous. I'm going to apologize if my response seems a little obtuse. You would absolutely be in a situation. It would not be as bad And so two things would be different in this graph. Two things that we see for our clients who did not go to enhanced benefits. Thing number one is your current rate, instead of being 32, would probably, I'm just going to use a number as an example, would be maybe 25. No, 25 is still not high. I mean, it's not low, but it's not as high as 32. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is, instead of your rate being 50% out in 25, 26, it would probably be in the high 30s. So and when you look at your budget, we think many folks will have difficulty coming up with high 30s to pay the rate. Well, what you're doing is going to high 40s. So you would clearly not be in the same situation. Would it be, you would still be in a situation, though, if you will.
It's almost unavoidable because of the unusual baby boomer bubble going through the system.
That's right. If you look at those 4 bullets, if you had not moved to enhanced benefits, 3 of those bullets would still apply to you, because you still have, you may not have quite as many folks retired, because the 2 at 55, you might have some of those folks still working here, but you would still have a lot of retirees.
And then we have the longevity factor. I know.
That's right.
2.5 years ago, when I was considering taking an early retirement buyout, which, by the way, didn't have this kind of package associated with it, they were telling people a single person to use 94 as an estimator for longevity, and 97 if you were part of a couple of any configuration. And they said that not that was the lifespan, but that statistically significant. So 25% of the population, and in a few years, it had gone from like 90, 92, 94. So. And I can only imagine. And so, can you tell me what kind of actuarial indicators or influences have been put into those numbers? If what I saw just in, for the 401k planning in my company, with the numbers as they were moving them out, what are those same kind of factors included in that?
So, in the interest of full disclosure, I love talking about this stuff. So please, if I get a little too excited and you want me to shut up, tell me to shut up.
Teresa might ask you out to lunch to have. I think she shares your excitement.
What happens is, when you have an individual account and you are planning your own retirement, you can't use an expected retirement age. You have to build in some cushion, because if you think about this, if you half of the people live longer than the expected, I said retirement age, I'm sorry, the more expected age at death. Half the people live longer than that. So if you use your expected mortality, then half of the people are going to have too much money and leave it to their kids, and the other half are going to run out of money. And so that is almost certainly why you were given the advice that, no, let's use something that anticipates you will live longer. So that's not what happens in a plan that has a pooled retirement like a defined benefit plan. In a pooled system, what the actuaries are doing is, generally speaking, this is a little simplistic, but if you have an individual who's 60 years old today, they might have a life expectancy on average of a little higher for women, a little lower for men, but about 85. The 60-year-old, the person who's going to be 60 years old 10 years from today might have a life expectancy of 86 or 87. And so, because the experience is pooled, you don't have to be overly conservative. But that's the difference between you're saving for your own as opposed to saving for a group. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it does. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I look at the numbers, and I studied a little over the weekend, looked at a lot of those charts, and it's like, whoa. But I can remember with our former city manager, he and I had some various conversations about this starting about 5 years ago. And at the time, I think he was being, pretty optimistic, and I was, kind of telling him what I was reading and about what was coming. And he was pretty confident that we would grow our way out of this. And, I know he was very sincere, and, he was going to find a way to make sure that, because I said I didn't know if it was going to be difficult to, to cut services, potentially fairly drastically to residents in order to, to fund the pensions without a change in some other agreements. And so, he was saying, don't worry, we're going to grow our way out of this. And just based on other economic factors, I just don't see how that's going to happen.
Yeah, so the last person in this room you should want to answer that question is me, because I'm myopic. I'm looking at the pension plan. I'm not a budget guy. I don't know where your revenue is coming from. I will tell you this, though. When we look at the projection of how much those rates are going up, I have yet to talk with a client who thinks their revenue is growing close to that rate of increase. And so, far be it from me, because other people are way more knowledgeable than I in this topic, but if you were able to do that, you might be one of the few agencies I shouldn't say agencies, one of the few cities in the state that might be able to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all I have for right now. Very enlightening.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Thank you very much for your presentation. City Manager?
Mayor, now we can go back to the budget. If you have any questions on what we presented, Angie and I, or anything on positions, your guidance, we'll be happy to answer or take your input.
Council questions? Councilmember O'Neill?
Well, perhaps Angie would, I don't know, she has some insights in this whole issue about, we've talked a lot about, getting City Place online, getting some of these other projects in terms of that was somewhat of the plan to grow revenue sufficiently. And you're showing, kind of maybe a softening with the sales tax. I think we've got a changing retail market. I was really sorry that I missed the panel that Andrew Crabtree put together recently on retail. And, we know the things like sales tax and income taxes, which are the basis of a lot of revenue planning in California, the two most volatile taxes, the last two things we should really be having as the foundation of our funding system. But saying all that, so what are you, I see you kind of your number, do you see, what are you thinking about, thoughts about how we might be able to grow revenues to cover a portion of this cost?
Sure. Yeah, I've lost a lot of sleep about this. I've only been here 3 months, and then this is what I'm faced with. And so I promise I did not make this
Please
deficit.
solve it for us. Thank you. No pressure.
Again, when I was showing you the revenues and I said there was no recession, there also is no City Place revenue in there also, because we don't know when that's going to come on place, when that revenue is actually going to hit. So we don't want to put a number in there and then it not come in until 7 years. And we've said that it's going to come in that 5 years. I just don't feel like that is my job. And, I'm your finance person to show you, and I want to be as conservative as possible. Obviously, if it comes on sooner, that's great. We can come back and look at those. We'll be able to kind of tackle it. Anytime we have some of these larger developments coming on, will be helpful. Again, sales tax, you're right, it's one of our most volatile, and I've learned that just in the short time I've been here. One of our biggest is business-to-business type of sales tax, and if we have one downturn, that could go really quickly, right? So I think that's another thing when I had said that we all need to probably get together after, we were able to balance 17, 18. So now we got to start looking forward. And we have a little bit of an advantage. I used to tell the city manager I worked for in my previous position as a director, I used to say, the hardest thing I've ever done is be a finance director during this recession. I didn't think I would ever have to do anything that hard. At least with this, we can see it coming. With the recession, we didn't know how hard it was going to hit and what it was going to do. And so it was kind of, everybody was blindsided, right? And we all got through it. We were able to do it together. I think we can see this picture. We see it coming. It gives us time to actually get together, pull together, be collaborative, and come up with some ideas to actually get through it. So that's all I have right now. I mean, obviously, there's all kinds of ideas that we can just kind of talk about and see on revenue generation, how much, but we are saying revenues are going to increase. Revenues are still strong, and that's the hard part, and I did reach out to our surrounding cities and say, once we saw this happening, are we seeing something that no one else is seeing, right? And they all came back and said, some of them actually have structural deficits, which means for 17, 18, which means all their normal services they cannot pay for because they have a structural deficit, so they have to figure out a way to do that. And so I think that's, we're going to be looking at the people around us too and kind of trying to see what ideas they come up with too.
Right, yeah. So, I do think we're all going to have to really be creative and we're not figuring out how to deliver services more efficiently. And if we have developments, I know a lot of folks, we associate having certain kinds of developments with a lot of expenses. We're doing a better job at recovering costs, and certain kinds of developments don't cost us as much in services, and doing that kind of analysis to, help us on the revenue side.
Right. Mayor, if I may add
Yes,
just a
go,
comment
please.
to that. That's one thing we were talking about, balancing act. Like, on one hand, we really want to provide quick service, good service to new developments and anyone seeking permits. But at the same time, I mean, the expectation, for example, for turnaround, it may be 2 weeks, but we may have to slide that to 3 weeks, because in order to maintain a 2-week turnaround, now you need more positions. More positions mean what we just saw on the tables. So that's the kind of balancing act to managing expectations.
Thank you. Councilmember Watanabe?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the great report, Angela. I'm sorry you're losing sleep over it, but I can understand. I wanted to ask you about the property tax. Is that a soft number, or how do you base that number? Because it seems like, property values are going up and up. I mean, I know in Rivermark, they're constantly setting new records every time they sell a house. So I can only imagine that's helping, our bottom line. And so is that a soft number? Do you expect that to go up?
Well, I hope that it would go up, but I'm actually going to ask Marcelo to come up, and he really spent a lot of time on this number. He actually worked with the county to determine what their assessed values were. We actually have a consultant that we are asking to look at these to make sure that we're using the right numbers, so maybe he could come up and just tell you a little bit of what he did just for the property tax.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council. So when we looked at property taxes, and this year we actually consulted with HDL on this as well, so to help us start determining that with a little more detail and a little more accuracy. I can tell you what we put in there is about a 6 for the next 2 years growth rate, and then slowly tampering that down to about a 5. The consultant report we had come back actually had that about a 4, but they don't estimate what your development will be. Over the last couple of years, yes, we've had some developments come in, and that's where we've seen about 10% increases. So truly we need to go back, and to answer sort of tightening our budget is understanding our development that's coming forward. So that's where we'll work as a city to do some of that. So I wouldn't say it's soft right now, because we're higher than even what the consultant has. So I'd say we're conservative, and then we'll work to get those numbers even better. So, but I would not say it's a lot of soft number on their property taxes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis?
Hey, Angela, not sleeping, huh?
I know, I thought I could sit down.
Welcome to the party. Okay, so You know, my favorite is TOT tax. And I did ask this of your previous person who's not here any longer, but I did ask him to look into how we could increase that little pie shape. Did you do an analysis on that? Did we talk to any of our hoteliers or people, you know, what their projections were, or what they were seeing to get this number at 20.6?
No, it didn't, basically with TOT, we looked more at historic to see how it's increasing. But, I have looked at other cities in the area, they do charge a higher rate for TOT than the city of Santa Clara. I mean, there's a lot of cities that are up at 12 to 14, but 12 being usually the norm in our area. So it might be something when we're talking about revenues, if that's something we want to look at.
Could we definitely look into that one? Sure. Because that's near and dear to my heart, and thank you for the little box. I love the little box. Okay, and the other thing too, on the $1.5 million, you were looking for direction. Could they invoice for that? Do we do that?
On the convention center,
Yeah.
currently, right now, I believe we just divide the budget by 12 and pay that. I'd have to verify that, but I'm sure we can ask them to, would they start invoicing us to show us like a detail of what they are doing?
Okay, only because we're tightening the budget, that might be a tightening budget thing. But yeah, if you could get that report back on that, because I think that might, I know Councilmember O'Neill and I are always looking for those increased revenue streams. And this might be one, because I do remember when I asked Gary, it was Sunnyvale was building 15 more hotels. And that's why I wanted to know. I didn't want them to take our TOT. I wanted to see how we could keep our money and not lose it to other cities. So if you could do that analysis, that'd be great.
One revenue that we're really low is also business licenses. I mean, compared to, I worked at a smaller city, and we brought in probably $2.3 million. They had less businesses, but here it's like 700 or 800,000.
Could you also bring that report back? Because I think that was something we talked about at the last time when we did the fee analysis. That was something, I think, was that Teresa? I think you popped that one, yeah. I think we both were concerned that those might be a little lower than surrounding cities. I think that we need to look at a lot of our fees, because I think that might be a possible revenue stream for us. So long as we're competitive with the other 14 cities, because the big dog is probably a little different than what they charge. But yeah, if we could be at least comparable to what's going on in the area.
And the business license, I think, is a voter. We would have to take it to the voters. But a lot of these things that we're talking about might have to go to the voters anyway.
Okay,
So.
and I guess this would be economic developer. What about any businesses that are coming in? Are we doing aggressive research to have businesses come in? Because I know we do have a few empty buildings around the towns. So, if we could fill those, that would be kind of nice. That might be just tax-wise or permitting or anything. But just thoughts, that's all. Thanks.
Mayor, if I may comment on
Yes,
that?
please.
Those are excellent suggestions, Councilmember Davis. But, I just want to make sure the expectation is not like by June 13th, we'll bring these things back to you. This is an exercise we'll go through next year, look at all the menu items and what can be done, and, go through all the details, how these can be implemented. And then,
Not expecting that, but just at least.
yeah, we can start the dialogue and what kind of things we should look at, and then go through them in detail for next year, the following year. Then we can have these implemented.
I just wanted to make a couple comments. I appreciate that you're conservative in your approach to the budget, knowing we don't have City Place yet, and who knows with San Jose suing us how long it'll take us to get it back, but that's going to be a big revenue stream for us. You talked about the recession. It hit us pretty hard. So did the dissolution of redevelopment, where we had to learn to live without, 12, 13 million pretty quickly, and we did, but it hurt. It hurt a lot, and we're still growing in the city, and I know this next year is going to be really crucial for us to make sure that, we have development projects that do generate income and fees for the city, and as opposed to taxing our city in terms of core services and other types of of costs, but this next year is going to be really crucial for us. There's a lot of things that we have to look at and we have to invest in because we need to, such as infrastructure that the city manager brings us all the time. We have a convention center that we have to make a decision as to what we do with that, because that's an income source for us. But if we don't do something with the convention center, it's the longer we wait, the more it costs us. So we really have to buckle down and figure out how we're going to do that. So it's probably going to get a little bit worse before it gets better, because in order for us to generate income, we're going to have to invest a little bit of income to do that. So, and then the unfunded pension liability is, it's a nightmare for us in terms of that. So I know we'll get through it. We have a lot of smart minds and a lot of smart people working on it to help us through, but it's going to be a little bit of a rocky road in the next couple of years because we're an older city, our infrastructure's older, we have to change things. And also our citizens and our residents are, they're looking to us to help with the issues involved with the quality of life. And so we have a really engaged community. When you have an engaged community, you need the personnel and the people here at City Hall to respond to the citizens. And so we have to have that fine balance where we have enough people working for the city and responding to the citizens as we should, but not too many that we're so overblown with employees that, it just exasperate our costs and fees. We have to find that balance. I think we're low now in terms of being able to have enough personnel to respond, but we still need to, be in a position where we're responding properly to our residents. So like I said, these next couple of years are going to be a little rocky for us, but thank you for what you've done in putting the budget together. I know there's still going to be more sessions on this, and you're going back to different committees. Maybe City Manager, you can tell us where do we go from here in terms of the budget, and then I'll go to the public. I know we have some public members that want to speak.
Well,
Thank you, Angie.
no, we're just
sorry,
taking
Dominic.
your input. We'll factor that into the final budget preparation and bring it back on June 13th. And like capital budget, you still have an opportunity to still share some comments. And
Okay.
then we can, before the budget is published, we can incorporate those as well.
All right, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Caserta.
Thank you. A lot of my questions were brilliantly asked by my colleagues. I just had one on page 5 about the department's city manager. I know you mentioned based on the assessment report of police. Can we talk about fire with just one new change? Can you talk about the genesis of that? And
Yeah, maybe Chief Kelly can speak to that one position.
specifically, Chief, do you feel that we are where we need to be for the high-quality service, or?
Yes, Councilmember Caserta. The study came back last year, the Council Commission study, and set a targeting staff rate of 166.5 personnel. We added another position, a staff position, upgraded the analyst position. It depends as we go through. The actual budget towards the end of this next fiscal year, we're close. We think that the consultant gave a pretty close estimate, but it depends on the number of leave hours by employees per sick leave, for example, or injured status. We'll be pretty close, but we'll be talking with the city manager throughout the next year to make it through the budget. So, yes, the number of employees that are in the budget are what the consultant said, and we believe that there's enough staffing there to get us through there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. If I could ask any member of the public if you'd like to come up and make some comments. City Clerk, do I have any cards or study session? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor Gilmore and council members. In terms of the FTE, it's going up by 27. I guess my question is, how do we define how many interns versus consultants versus contractors we're using there? Because sometimes we can sort of play games with those. Certainly, interns cost quite a bit less. The other question was, what would be the impact of making the planning department an enterprise, like some other cities have? And then have we looked at metrics? I think Angie did some metrics with other cities, but could we look at what our budget is and what our FTE counts are per capita versus other cities of our size? And then I know last year we looked at our cost structure and tried to do better cost recovery for a lot of functions, I think particularly in the buildings department. And I'm wondering, what's the impact of that cost recovery program? And are we now at full cost recovery? It seems like the convention center is kind of a city-owned business. It seems like if the city is going to be in a business like that, we should be fairly profitable from that standpoint. And it could be a way to generate revenue for our general budget. And then this is, again, for staff. How will the swim center, which I think is a $180 million project, be affected by this budget? And then this is to possibly the CalPERS presenter. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
John.
When you talked about the CalPERS contributions going up to 50% for general employees and 75% for public safety, is that just the city's share, or is that combined city and employee share? Thank you.
Thank you. City staff, did you get all those questions?
Generally, yes.
Interns versus consultants and
Yes.
your FTEs, Planning Commission as an enterprise fund, metrics for employees, cost recovery for planning, how we're doing on that, swim center, finances, and the question on CalPERS. So if we can get those answered for our next session.
Okay.
Or sooner. Thank you. Hello.
Do we have a chart online somewhere that talks about the working capital reserve and what has it been and what it's been spent on? I'd like to see what we've had and where we've spent that money, because if we're down to zero, I'd like to know where we started and how we've been absorbing it. It wasn't clear from what Angie presented, where's all the money we're getting from the stadium? Where did that money go, and where's that on this chart? I think one thing that's not showing on, I hate to bring it up, but I think we're missing another unfunded pension liability, and that's the benefits liability. That's still not on this chart.
That was the what? I'm sorry?
The unfunded pension benefits liability,
Oh.
that I think shows up in, is it 19 or 20 or something? That's not on here yet, and that's coming. So you were not done with the unfunded, ouch part isn't all done yet. We keep looking at transitioning our industrial properties to residential, and one of the things I've been asking for years, and I'd like to see on every single project that comes into this planning department, we need to have an economic impact report on every single project. We need to see what it was bringing in from an industrial standpoint, what it'll bring in as residential, what that impact is on police, fire, and infrastructure. And they have to have costs and services associated with that. And we're really just keep sticking our head in the sand every time we're ignoring that. Because as we are transitioning out of industrial to residential, we lose money. Residential property does not make us money. The incremental tax, property tax, does not pay for the increased infrastructure costs. So that is not a get-out-of-jail pass. It's going to offset these pension liabilities, the unfunded liabilities. So that needs to be on absolutely every single project we have coming through here. We keep talking about economic development, but nothing gets done. And when it comes to servicing the people, when we dissolved RDA, which I'm actually happy what did happen, because we were using it as a cash machine and it was going away anyways. So as we're going forward with this, we didn't get rid of the staff associated with that. So we need to look
Debbie.
at refocusing staff and getting the right staff doing the right things.
Thank you, Debbie.
So economic development, we need to look at how to get out of this 50% thing, and economic development is an important part that's not being done or done well. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Please come forward. Anyone else? Okay, come now or don't come. Thank you.
That was coming up. Hi, Scott Lane. Thank you for this. I'm glad to hear this from staff and hear other people excited about this. For several years, we've been saying the city's going bankrupt. The city just was not acknowledging it. Yes, we should have built more hotels. I think the city really needs to have a game plan of how to say, this is what we want, this is where you're going to deliver it. Look to a big city, look to the big dog, look at San Francisco. They game plan this stuff. Work with us in the community. We've been trying to get you to game plan this for years, but I'm going to once again ask, the city attorney needs to have more staff to look into our previous contracts. Let me give you an example. The 49ers 11-acre training facility, $26,500. Market rate would be $3 to $5 million a year, adjusted for inflation. You have commercial properties in Santa Clara and throughout California that are not adjusted for inflation. We do need to get maybe some more fees for small businesses, but we want to make sure small business comes here. We want more entrepreneurs. We need a true nexus study. What I've heard behind the scenes is it's a pretty weak sauce nexus study. We need to really game plan what we're going to do and not be responsive to what the developers want to do. They give us world-class projects? No. Even the property that you want to get rid of the golf course, it's full of lies. We were making $5 million a year, and the city staff was not being truthful with you. We were netting $1.5 million a year. So take off your 49er glasses. That has blinded the city councils and managers for years now. A lot of it comes down to the bad deals we've made on these developments, whatever they are. The other thing is we need to work with other cities to say, even if we can do all this, even if we can right our ship, we need to work with other people to close the commercial Prop 13 loophole. I say this to MTC all the time. If we do that, the first year is $9 billion. Eventually, it's going to go down to $5 billion for the state, but think of what you can do for at least $5 billion across the state. We can get some of our RDA back. Last but not least, the MTC in their analysis has baked in between now and 2040 two very deep recessions. So
Thank
factor
you.
that.
Thanks, Scott. All right, is there anyone else talk about the budget? Please come forward. Did you come? We haven't started our actual council meeting yet. We're in a study session about the budget. If you'd like to come comment. I thought I was late. Oh, no, you're really early. God, you got a front seat. All right, anyone else? Oh, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor.
I wanted to thank Mr. Lane for bringing up the Nexus study. Our fourth and last meeting is a week from tomorrow night here at 6 p.m., and we're going to then get that recommendation to the council ASAP within a few weeks from there. So I want to thank him for bringing that up. I really hope we get a lot of people, the public. It'll be a night meeting.
Very good, thank you. City Manager, any final thoughts before we?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I think we really appreciate, I thank you for giving us your comments and inputs, and also the public. I mean, a lot of good ideas come from the public. I strongly believe it's a partnership all the way around, staff, council, public. That's where a lot of ideas can be developed. One thing again, as partners, I also want to request the community, while we are engaged to provide the best service we can, but at the same time, there are a lot of requests that come from the community also. Let me give you an example, like public records requests, using that as an example. A lot of time, staff time is spent on that, and half of the times, this material that's gathered is not even picked up. Those kinds of things. I'm not saying don't ask for it, but, be judicious about it. If something is really needed, yes, we are here to provide that service, but if it's two factions just going at each other and staff gets caught in the middle, just producing those kind of documents. Similarly, other expectations, just managing those. That's a request from staff side. And lastly, Mayor, I do want to thank this group of people sitting here. They've been really, really involved in, balancing the budget and really looking at it with a fine-tooth comb, and a lot of staff within their departments. One thing to think about going forward, I'm a short timer, that's why maybe I'm being a little bold, is that, some agencies are looking at doing budgets once in 2 years, biennial type of budgets. Maybe we need to think about that, because a lot of staff time and, production of these documents and everything, it's all, cost. So going forward, I'm just leaving a thought with you, just thinking about it. VTA does it. I believe the water district does it, so, that kind of thing, something to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for putting this together. It's a very difficult, so thank you yes, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. All right, we are going to take a short break and start the council meeting at 7. Thank you.